I am so happy to announce today the Foundation for Economic Education's new entrepreneur in residence, Tobin Slaven, who has been on the Liberated podcast a couple of times before and is back today to talk about his new role where he'll be helping to champion the ideas of education, entrepreneurship, and innovation as a co-founder himself of Acton Academy Fort Lauderdale. Acton Academy Fort Lauderdale is part of the fast-growing Acton Academy network of schools that now numbers over 300 globally, serving thousands of learners with its learner-driven educational approach. And Tobin is a longtime educator, entrepreneur. He's also an author. And I'm so excited not only to have him on the podcast today, but to work with him more closely over the coming months here at FEE. So Tobin Slaven, welcome back to the Liberated podcast and welcome to FEE.
Thanks. It feels all new and different now because I'm wearing a different hat and I'm very excited about it. And I feel blessed. I appreciate the work that you've been doing for a number of years, Carrie. So to be able to work with you and the team that you're assembling, I'm just excited about the role.
I'm excited too. I know listeners and viewers heard recently from Nasia Israel, who joined FEE earlier this month as our new Liberated Education Associate, really helping to kind of build out the Liberated brand and have more reach and impact and inspiring parents, teachers, and learners to know what's possible in education and that learning can and should be joyful and that it's everyday entrepreneurs who are creating those joyful learning environments, which is something you have certainly done alongside your co-founder wife, Martina, at Acton Academy Fort Lauderdale. So we'll talk about your journey to becoming a school founder, which was not something you had anticipated earlier in your career. But let's start, Tobin, if we could, kind of back toward the beginning of your professional career. You started off as an educator. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background there.
Yes, and I'll answer that question. I also want to just say about Nasia, she's such an impressive young lady. This is part of the excitement for me of being able to join this team. But what she's accomplished already, it's inspiring to us. And I'm in my 50s, so we've sort of had our life experiences that prepared us for the point. And that's very much how I think about my background, starting in education, leaving, and at the time intending never to come back into education, moving into entrepreneurship. And now I feel like a little bit coming full circle. We never thought we'd be starting a school. Here we are in our third year down here in Fort Lauderdale. So it's has been a journey, continues to be a learning experience. And every day we're very blessed. I think as much as we pour into our families and our learners, we're getting equally as much or more back. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's great. And Nasia has talked about, she talked when I had her on the podcast recently too, talked about how it's really unconventional education that can breed innovation and entrepreneurship in young people because they, especially with sort of learner-driven models like Acton and the kind of environment that she was in as a homeschooler, really encouraged and cultivated, personal agency and independence and autonomy and an ability to really discover one's passions and talents and then go for them sooner rather than later. Why wait? Might as well become an entrepreneur and an innovator as a teen in her case. And so I think you're right. It's inspiring for us all. So, you and I both went to college as undergrads in Maine around the same time. I was at Bowdoin College. You were at Colby College. You're a Maine native. And then you went to graduate school in education for a master's degree and worked in education for a while. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, my undergrad, I was trained to be a teacher, a classroom teacher. And I did do that. In fact, I did a whole bunch of different age levels. My love at that time when I graduated Colby was athletics. So I was first a high school and later a college basketball coach. And I had just grown up with playing basketball, but I was a mediocre athlete. And where I found myself was being very mediocre. I found that I could learn all the different positions and learn sort of the intricacies and not only enjoyed, found a passion for the coaching, but did well with it. I had a team that won a state championship. I won some accolades as a coach, both at the high school and college level. So that was very much sort of my primary focus, is building that out. And in the small college level, or even the high school level, you do all the other jobs with it. So I was a substitute teacher. I was an ed tech one year. I did a year of assistant coach at Colby. I went back and worked with Dick Whitmore there. He's been very supportive of me over the years, and eventually coached at the University of Maine at Machias. And all through that time, very education focused, seeing all different age levels, from kindergarten, substituting in kindergarten classrooms, all the way up to when I got my master's, instructing as an adjunct professor at the university level, a couple of both UMaine Machias and Hudson University at the time. So I saw a lot of different things, but I also got very disillusioned with education. I felt at the time that I was living in a bubble, and it was distant from what I was seeing in the real world. And some exposure to the business world confirmed that for me, that I love the fast pace. You are as good as you are able to produce in the business world. And I enjoyed that. It mirrored what I loved about athletics. And so I made the transition, I think it was 2003, 2004, sometime in that time frame, about 20 years ago, switched over into the business world and just started. I didn't have an entrepreneurial background growing up, but I got exposed to it during that time period and just went full force into the business world. And also blessed to work on a number of different projects, from biomass energy projects to a number of different things that I never thought I would have an opportunity to work with. But that diverse background really shaped who I am today. And when I learned about Acton, that I sort of saw these two different backgrounds sort of coming together. Actons tend to be very entrepreneurial and approach learning with a very different perspective, I guess I should say. And so we do the children's business fairs every year. It's sort of baked into what we do at Acton. And so I felt, again, my hero's journey was sort of coming around. I left education, never thought I'd come back. But when we started the school here, it allowed me to connect different parts of my background.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about your launch of Acton Academy Fort Lauderdale, which you've talked about previously on the podcast, but it was a while back. So I want to refresh listeners and viewers about that story. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit more about, your career in business as an entrepreneur and an author. You wrote the book Experts Never Chase. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the motivation for that book and sort of what you were working on at the time that led to that.
Yeah, so I have a sort of a focus area for my entrepreneurial time in marketing and communications. I was an English major, but I think it was just a curiosity that I built on, because it seemed to be one of the key. If you have a great product or a great service, if people don't know about it, if you don't make the right connections, you're going to struggle and maybe even have to close your doors. So that seemed to be one of the key skill sets and the world was changing at the time. So this was, Facebook came on the scene, and all of a sudden Facebook marketing was opening up so many opportunities. And so the digital marketing, SEO and email marketing and all those things, I had to sharpen my skills in those areas, and ended up building a diverse toolbox, which I think is represented in that Experts Never Chase. The basic premise is that there are all these folks that are world-changing experts. They have expertise in a given area, whatever it might be, but they may not have backgrounds in marketing and sales. And so we put together a book set, because if you are, an expert if you're a hypnotherapist, for example, your business is constrained by your ability to go out and connect with folks who need that service that you're providing. And so I think, and when you're an expert, you're not used to trying to chase people down and convince them that you're an expert. They come to you, but if that's not happening, the survival of your business depends on being able to build those pathways for people to find you and for you to have those conversations. The most effective way for you to deliver your services is to focus on that service and not trying to convince someone that it's valuable. So it's a very much a approach to communication, and I think building a book of business for folks that are not used to doing that for themselves, not bragging about themselves and all those. It's a different kind of marketing than traditional like consumer goods.
Yeah, and it's so valuable now, I think, Tobin, for the work that you'll be doing with us over the coming months as FEE's Entrepreneur in Residence, as we build out a new education entrepreneurship lab at FEE that will have a lot of different initiatives involved with it around inspiring more entrepreneurial parents and teachers to become education entrepreneurs, as well as supporting existing founders and also helping parents and learners to realize the possibilities available to them in education beyond a conventional classroom. So just so much that we have going on at FEE regarding that lab, and you very much a part of that. And I can imagine some of this work that you've done in the past can be really helpful, particularly in supporting prospective and current education entrepreneurs who are running schools, because in many cases, these founders are parents or teachers who maybe have never run a small business before. To your point of an example of, a therapist now running a small practice, how do they attract families? How do they stay true to their mission? And be able to recruit families or clients to them without sort of compromising what their service, basic service is. And so I can imagine that will be something that will be extremely helpful for founders, just that perspective that you have. I wonder if you can comment on that.
Well, I'm super excited about the lab and for multiple levels, but a big part of it is because I've had a couple of my own experiences of going through accelerator programs through projects of my own or for clients where we were working with mentors and working with these programs that are all designed to create a pipeline and help you launch this new value into the world and into the marketplace. And so having been on the other side of the table and benefited from those experiences, also seeing some of the things that I really enjoyed, really benefited from, or didn't like as much. I'm excited to have a voice at the table to help shape that in the lab that's coming. And I think we've made a lot of our own mistakes along the way. So I like to think that I bring the benefit of some of that experience. I'm a big believer that, and this is a newfound insight. I would say that my experience with Acton has brought this to my attention and confirmed it through direct experience, which is we all make our own choices with the consequences that result from them. And my pathway might look different from your own, Carrie's. And so I can't give you advice per se because I'm not you. I don't bring the wealth of experience that you bring to the table or even know all the intricacies of the choices that you have to make day to day. But what I can share is testimony from my own background. We experienced this. We had this challenge when we opened our doors with 4 learners and immediately ran into a zoning lease issue and had to move into a different space, and it threatened the survival of our school. So I can talk about that direct experience, but it would be inaccurate and I think not serving for me to tell someone else you should do X or you should do Y. I can present would it work better for you to do X or Y and present those pathways, but ultimately we're each responsible for the choices that we make. And I think that's very much in alignment with what FEE stands for, which is more choice in the marketplace around us so that we can all do what we need to do for our families, for our schools, for ourselves individually.
Yeah, and of course, FEE's focus as well on, individual freedom and responsibility and entrepreneurship. And that's very much a part of this, that being an entrepreneur is about taking a risk, taking a leap, to say, I can create a new product or service that I think people will want and make it as the best that I can make it and see what happens in terms of the market demand for that. So, very much, but I think that's also what we're trying to do with this new lab is also support founders in that journey. The journey is uniquely theirs, but we can be the cheerleaders on the side and encouraging them along. So excited about that. So you switched from sort of the business world and your own clients and helping them to becoming a school founder. And like so many of the school founders I've interviewed on this podcast, that occurred as a direct result of COVID, of the pandemic. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what was happening and how you kind of found your way to Florida in the spring of 2020.
I'm going to share up front that our family, so we have 5 children, but 4 of them are adults. So I'm going to reference my youngest daughter because she's actually a learner in our school, and her story, her needs, and our consideration for that was a big part of how we arrived at where we're at today. But all of our children have had diverse experiences. So our older children grew up in Maine. They went through the public school system. We're really proud of them because they were very much each their own unique human being making their own choices. And so when they were pushed to do certain things, for example, in their high school experience, the high school guidance counselors were pushing everybody to apply to university, almost like, if you don't know what to do, this is where you should go. And they all, several of them went through university and had their degree programs. Others chose not to, but they were all very focused, and I think had learned to find their own voice of what was right for them. So I think we were kind of doing something Acton-like as a family, even before we knew that existed. But prior to COVID, we were living in Europe. My wife is from Europe. We had moved over there. Her family had some health issues, her parents specifically, so that we could be there. She could be there for them. At the time, my work allowed me to work virtually. And so our youngest daughter, who started public school in Maine, did public school in Slovakia. She's bilingual, so she had had a number of different experiences. But when we started moving around, we went into, most folks say homeschooling. I would describe it as unschooling because we very much were following her interests, curiosities, and building around that instead of just trying to take a school curriculum and pull it home and make it work. And she was loving. Honestly, she's because she's so curious and was able to follow all these things that excite her. She was enjoying the experience. But what I recognized was the social emotional gap. And I think even at the time that we did it, we didn't realize that is such an important part of the learning experience for all of us. And when you're in a school environment, there are things that happen that you can't eject yourself from. So I think, to me, the idea of trying to supplement with, after school programs or camps and things, it's great. But if it's too easy for a young person to sort of eject themselves when things get hard, you don't get the full benefit. And so that's one of the things that we saw for her. And we learned about Acton, and it sounded really appealing. Where most of our parents will say, with all these micro schools, man, I wish I could have done that when I was younger. I wish this was available. And so that was the first appeal to us as parents and for her. But now, actually seeing the school operate on a day-to-day basis, now I see that getting young people together and trusting them to do hard things and learn to get along with each other and do hard things collaboratively is such a valuable skill, not only for the shaping of who they are today, but I also strongly believe this is one of the key skill sets that we're going to be looking for as our world shifts and change. We can talk more about AI and how that will shift things, but I know the employers want it. I know employers are looking less for sort of traditional, for a long time, there was all this focus on STEM and how important this background was going to be. Now they want, ability to manage your time, ability to manage projects and work collaboratively, because they will give you the hard skill sets that you need for whatever kind of career you pursue. Those industries have that package, but they need a solid foundation to build upon. And I think they're frustrated because not everyone coming out of traditional schooling has that opportunity to build that foundation. And I think it's a calling to us as alternative, we're the innovators in this micro school alternative education space. So this is our opportunity to address that show what the opportunities would be, and if people see the value, they'll follow quickly in our steps to build that into their programs as well.
Yeah, so you were just on a bit of a family vacation, if I recall, in the spring of 2020 and sort of got stranded in Florida
Yeah.
and then decided to plant some roots and build a school. So tell us about how that happened.
Yeah, so we were, that's exactly right. We had flown back for business meetings in March of 2020. And literally like 3 days after the meetings had started, we were at a series of meetings. And we're going to be here, I think, 60 days in the US, visiting family, traveling around. But they closed the borders. All our stuff was over in Europe in storage. We had been planning to move back and actually move to the city of Prague. So we were sort of mid-move, and all, the world turned upside down for us and everyone else. And we ended up here in South Florida. We fell in love with Fort Lauderdale. And that's when we were exposed to the Acton network. We met another Acton owner who owned several campuses actually. And we didn't know this world existed, but we applied to become owners. We were approved, and that started our journey of creating this school here in our adopted home of Fort Lauderdale, which we really have come to love, specifically Fort Lauderdale and South Florida. And since then, there's been a boom of Actons. I would say all micro schools, really. But I can speak, there are 18 different Actons just in the state of Florida alone. So there's been this surge of interest. And then Fort Lauderdale, someone called it the other day, the hub of the micro school universe here, because there's so many cool models of these, what I would call rock star educators who have left that world of traditional education, brought their gifts and genius into creating their own spaces. And so, now you have Colossal, and you have Kind, and you have Compass, and all these really cool schools. And they're all right here in South Florida or around us, serving families, building these communities and creating a path so that, what I grew up with, there was essentially a micro school called the Bay School, where I grew up in Blue Hill, Maine. So I had friends that went to essentially a micro school, what is that, 35 years ago. So but it was so different and it was so unusual at the time. Now, I think for a lot of families, they're realizing this could be us. And we have the scholarship, the voucher program here in Florida, which I think is supporting it, making it more appealing for families to dip their toes in the water and try it for themselves.
Yeah, South Florida is a very special place for education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I always love going down there and seeing what you all are building, and just the ways in which you're reimagining teaching and learning, and obviously creating, as you say, more accessible programs thanks to Florida's robust education choice policies that recently went universal last year, applying to all K-12 students throughout the state. So just exciting times in Florida. And maybe you could share a little bit for listeners and viewers who are not familiar with Acton Academy or learner-driven education, what that means.
I think that I want to just say on South Florida, I think there's an opportunity to maybe unpack. So when I think about the lab and the toolkits and resources that we have an opportunity to create to support this ecosystem, I think South Florida is maybe unique. Maybe this is just my bias because we're here, but it seems to me a little bit unique and an opportunity to unpack what's happening here. And I give a ton of credit to folks like Shireen at Colossal and Tony at Surf State Science, or Candy at Micro Schools, the Micro Schools net south of Florida. There are folks that have been really instrumental in bringing these different stories and individuals together so that we work collaboratively. We all have our own thing going and everyone's busy, but has become this hub, this sort of network that is supporting one another. And sometimes it's just when you have a bad day and knowing that you can talk to someone and they've been there before, they faced it this way, and it gives you more options. I think there's an opportunity to unpack what's working well here. And I know you do a wonderful job of portraying this through the Liberated podcast. In different parts of the country, there are these hotbeds, and unpacking what is consistent, what are the patterns there, and maybe we can create some toolkits around that others will be able to do the same thing in their city, in their state or region in a way that makes sense for them, so that there are more supportive and connective tissues between these stories that are popping up. Really amazing stories. Sorry, I
Such,
forgot to
such
that
amazing
didn't
stories.
answer
So
your original question.
no, I'm glad that you did spend some more time in that, because it really, I mean, Shireen Radigan, who's of course been on the podcast before, founder of Colossal Academy, and co-founder along with Tony Floriciardi of the Innovative Educators Network in Florida, calls the South Florida the education renaissance. And I think it really is. It's definitely the hub, as you said, of education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We're seeing that across the country, but there is something really special happening in your neck of the woods. So I asked you, Tobin, to just share a little bit about Acton Academy and its educational philosophy.
So Acton is a learner-driven model, and essentially that means that we're shifting the agency into the hands of the young people. That by itself is not unique, because there are other models that have come before us. And I know you're very familiar with Sudbury and some of the free democratic schools. I think the big thing that I see that's new for me and maybe different is this idea of learning and teaching they're not the same thing, and they don't always go together. And many times, if you look at what we do as adults, you and I even specifically, we're constantly learning new things. We're continuous lifelong learners, and building that skill set, like when we have to do something because it's material in whatever project we're working on, if we don't learn something new, we're not going to be able to move the project forward. We don't always seek out teachers. We might seek out resources. We might watch a YouTube video. Maybe sometimes we do buy online courses, but it's often self-paced. You're going through it, and it doesn't have the components that we typically think about with teaching: instruction, an instructor at the front of the room, time for a lecture. It's much more self-paced, and again, driven by the learner themselves. And I think Acton, Jeff and Laura were very prescient over a dozen years ago to recognize this opportunity and to build structure, systems, and tools around this. So I think a lot of folks, Acton looks very different, and we get calls every day for folks who are recognizing there's this whole new world of this whole ecosystem of opportunities and different choices. And it's one of the first conversations we have that with them of, you're not going to have homework, you're not going to have tests. That's true of a number of micro schools who have flipped this educational model upside down and are doing things differently. But you're also not going to have a teacher. You're not going to have that authority position in the classroom, and that essentially challenges the young person to sit in the driver's seat, put their hands on the wheel, and be responsible for their own education. And it's hard. It's hard on the parents. It's really hard on the young people. But if you're willing to take a step up into that role and be responsible for it, amazing things can happen.
It's just so exciting to see Actons. I've been able to visit many of them across the US, and of course, visit your school several times. And it's just really so remarkable to see what young people are capable of doing when they are in charge of their own education. And crucially, with Acton, holding each other accountable and supporting each other as peers through this process. And then the adults are there, as guides. I mean, that's what you're called within the Acton vernacular. But it's really the responsibility is on the young people themselves. And another thing that
I would just add, I want to add one thing to that, Carrie. It's also a lot of what I learned to do as an educator years ago.
Yeah.
What I now do today is counterintuitive. So the things that I want and I'm inclined to do is actually the wrong step in the Acton model. So I've really had to retrain my own brain of how to step back. Sometimes we call it the chaos. Sometimes the chaos has to happen, because that is a young person learns their voice and their own agency by stepping into that chaos and telling their peers, their friends, I don't want to live like this. Like, we can do better. And so I'll give you a material example. This fall, we have a young person, essentially a senior in high school, what they call a launch pad or an Acton, who's come to visit our school and several other Actons here in Florida from West Austin, Texas. He's flying in for a couple of weeks, and he's coming to consult and meet with our learners. So they have another peer who's been through the wars. Essentially, he's a veteran launch padder who's seen the ins and outs to help us understand, because we're a new Acton. We're only in our third year. We're still in baby steps compared to these schools that have been out there for a dozen years. And so he's bringing some of that value, and it's so much more valuable for our 12, 13-year-olds to hear that from a 17-year-old who's been there, done that, and seen how to get there, instead of because basically we model. If we're doing our jobs, we're modeling a lot, but we can't step in and say, you have to do it this way, or you should be doing it that way, because now we are essentially breaking our covenants as guides in an Acton. There are guardrails of what we can do and what we don't do in our school, because the minute we overstep those bounds, the agency is taken away from young people.
Yeah, and you briefly mentioned Jeff and Laura Sandifer, the co-founders of Acton Academy, who launched the first school back in 2009 in Austin, Texas, really for their children. And like, again, so many of today's school founders couldn't find what they were looking for their own children, so decided to build it. A similar story for you. And if listeners and viewers are interested in learning more about the origin story of Acton Academy and learning more about the model, I'd encourage everyone to read Laura's phenomenal book, Courage to Grow, which shares that story in much more depth. And I also had the opportunity to interview Jeff Sandifer on the podcast last year. So I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes as well. So Tobin, as we think about now your new role as the entrepreneur in residence at the Foundation for Economic Education and helping us to launch our new Education Entrepreneurship Lab, what excites you most?
I think that what I'm excited about sharing, what I believe I can bring to the table, is an opportunity to sometimes, when needed, reframe a conversation or a perspective of how folks are looking at things. So as a business person, you often run into obstacles and you feel stuck, and it's just not clear how to get over or around or even under this big boulder that's in the pathway that is not allowing you to move forward towards whatever goals or dreams or objectives that you've set. And I think that sometimes someone who's seeing it a little bit differently, of which I've had a diversity of experiences, but sometimes it's even as simple as we all have gifts and genius inside of us that we want to share, but it's not always what the market wants or needs at the time. So being able to translate or crosswalk, if you think of, walking across the street, it's really valuable on the other side of the street if you can crosswalk that genius and value that you're creating. And I see this a lot with these rock star educators. They bring so much value, but they're also like myself, they were trained in a certain methodology, a certain way of doing things that may or may not be what the market is demanding right now. So being able to crosswalk that over to the other side of the street and meet families where they're at and what they need, I think is one of the key skill sets that I learned. Marketing is not just how you talk about things. It's really listening to your market, recognizing what they value, and being able to communicate it there on that side. And sometimes that means even changing the service that we provide, or doing things a little bit differently than you thought you were going to do, but that's what the market is demanding from you. And I think good business people are able to make those adjustments, and it shows, because they're the ones who survive and thrive in the marketplace, because they find that product market fit or service market fit. So I'm excited to have those conversations. I don't always have the right answers. None of us do, but all of us together, if we get more voices at the table and perspectives, and we can kind of go around the table and see it from different angles. I tend to be a contrarian thinker, and so I bring that to the table of new perspectives, and we can get the best answers that way.
Yeah, and so much of what we do at FEE with Liberated and now the new Education Entrepreneurship Lab is focused on the supply side, really encouraging entrepreneurs to create new learning models. But I think there's also a piece of this that's on the demand side, as more parents now have access to different learning models beyond an assigned district school. So part of it is sort of letting families know what's possible for education, and especially these unconventional educational models. I wonder if you can comment a little bit on that demand side and how we could encourage parents to look beyond a conventional classroom.
Yeah, so I think our families need champions, because there are definite needs there, and they feel it. It's a visceral feeling for a lot of these families, but they're not always sure how to put voice to it, and they feel a little bit exposed. You know, their family and friends are saying, "You're doing what? You're taking your child out of school to do this crazy thing, and are you sure you want to do that? And what about this and this and this? Because it looks very different from the traditional." Backgrounds, schooling experiences that a lot of us had years ago. And so I think championing these families and letting them know that there is a different value system, and that they need to be validated in recognizing their beautiful young child that they see struggling in a traditional environment. It may not, there's nothing wrong with them. They need something a little bit different, and they're right to look to serve those differences. And so, standardized testing is one of these things that we've seen where, in the absence of other measures, families look to standardized testing scores as the validation of whether something is working. There's so much more to a human being than just how someone tests on these limited testing scores. And as you mentioned the other day, Carrie, unfortunately, coming out of COVID, when we would think that the world sort of woke up and recognized there's a lot of other values that we can seek. And, I think a lot of people had moments, epiphanies during coming out of COVID, that they recognize there a difference in their own value system. In the education world, they've doubled down on the standardized testing because they recognize that there were learning losses as these systems shifted and people were home. And so to make up for it, they're testing more, and they're teaching to the test more, and they're more focused on what I believe and what many of our families believe is actually what's broken, and not serving. So I think there's a big opportunity to have a conversation about what are some of the other value systems: social emotional learning, real world agency and application and skill sets, meeting up and matching with what the employers are offering and where the biggest opportunities are there. Higher education is under duress right now. I think we're going to be seeing major changes in that whole ecosystem, which, for a long time, our schools were, and this is sort of how I grew up. Even Maine was a little bit like this. Like, their measures of success were what percentage of students were going on to higher education, as if that was the most important thing. And I think it's fair to step back and say, is that the path for you or for me or for everyone? Maybe not. Maybe there are other pathways that are even more rewarding. And what does that look like? And how do we support and validate the individual or individual family and their choices, and not try to put everyone through the same system, same machine?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And one interesting trend that I've been seeing really over just the past year in talking to founders is that more and more parents are now choosing unconventional education right out of the gate, right, for kindergarten. And I imagine you're seeing this as well, as a K to 12 school, Acton Academy Fort Lauderdale. So I think that's also a great sign that it's not just parents in a moment of struggle with their child in a conventional classroom. It's parents being more proactive in early childhood to really think about what they want for their child's education, for their child's growth and future, and then choosing an alternative to a conventional classroom as a result of that. So I think we'll probably see more of that in the coming years as well. I know we're getting kind of close on time, Tobin, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about AI in education, because this is another one of your areas of expertise, even though you may not like to use that term, expert, but also a real interest for you, and something that's shaping education broadly, both in conventional systems and in out-of-system educational environments. You'll be writing a lot at fee.org over the coming weeks about education entrepreneurship, education trends, and AI in education. So maybe you could give us a little sneak preview of what are some of your thoughts around AI in education.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to start some of these conversations and then hear, feedback and explore it with others, because there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fear mongering about AI, and because of movies and what it means. It's not that there aren't risks there that need to be thought about carefully and plans put in place, but I'm generally optimistic about these new tools that are being made available, and very strongly feel that we're not serving our young people if we don't prepare them for the world that they're going to live in, not the one that we're living in today. And it is going to look dramatically different. So as big a shift as it was in the 70s when calculators started to come into school and supposedly that was going to ruin our math skills, and then it was later on it was Wikipedia was going to, again, no one was going to be able to write a paper any longer because everyone would just be copying and pasting from Wikipedia and all these resources. I think we're going to see the same kind of seismic shift with AI, but the ability to work collaboratively with AI, and I'm experimenting on myself on a day-to-day basis of how to work with these tools, and I'm just blown away at the pace and the velocity of how quickly the tools are getting better and better. And it is the quote from Paul Graham is, it's best to live in the future and then recognize what's missing and move backwards. And I think if, through the work that we're doing in the lab, if we can help in our slice of the world, education entrepreneurship, we can help folks take that approach and work backwards and prepare our young people for what they're going to, it's going to be really exciting. I'm very optimistic about what's coming their way. I think the opportunities are huge. There are risks that need to be navigated as well. But it's just a blessed time. Growing up, I never thought I'd see some of the things that exist today, AI tools that exist today, and they're never going to be as bad as they are today because they're just getting better and better every single day. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It is such an exciting time. I always say that it's a wonderful time to be involved in education and to really be able to witness these educational innovations and shifting learning from its top-down historic model to one that is much more bottom-up, much more choice-enabled and entrepreneur-driven. And I'm just so excited to have you as part of the voice of the new Education Entrepreneurship Lab at FEE, and being able to produce more content for us at fee.org over the coming weeks and months. So be on the lookout, listeners and viewers, for Tobin's articles. You can always also connect with him at Tobin Slaven, Slaven at fee.org, and connect with you on social media, I think, as well. Tobin, is that right? What are your preferred socials?
I try to have a presence on all the different channels a little bit, but yes, I take a lot of pride that when people reach out, and particularly through email is a great pathway, that I respond. I see them, I respond, and I don't ignore them. So yeah, I'd love to hear folks, and I think that the most important thing that we do is that it's a conversation. There are different voices. All the voices need to be at the table and be heard, and that's a big that hasn't always happened. So if we can play a part in doing that, we're also doing part of what this role requires.
Yeah, it's such an incredible, diverse, decentralized education ecosystem that's emerging across the US, and we will be continuing to spotlight that now with even more voices at FEE. So Tobin Slaven, thank you again for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Carrie.